Would you dare sleep alone in the woods after hearing these stories? There are places where humans should not set foot, vast forests where darkness swallows the light, and strange sounds echo among the trees. No one knows what lurks there. The following 3 stories are all true, told by people who witnessed the horrors in the woods. Some were lucky enough to escape, but others disappeared forever. Are you ready to enter this mysterious world? If so, stay until the end, because the last story may make you never dare to enter the woods again. Story 1. The Silent Watchman in the Quarry. The sun had long since set when I found myself walking down the winding dirt road that led to the old quarry. The path was barely visible, swallowed up by the spreading darkness and tangled branches. The only light came from my headlamp, casting long, ominous shadows that danced ominously across the rugged terrain. I had heard tales of this place. Abandoned, creepy, and the perfect setting for ghost stories. Curiosity had drawn me here, but I never expected to encounter something so unsettling. When I finally reached the quarry, my flashlight beamed down on a scene that was exactly like something out of a nightmare. And from the crest of the hill, I spotted a lone figure at the foot of the hill, barely distinguishable against the backdrop of jagged rocks and the crumbling ruins of a bygone era. At first glance, it appeared to be a mannequin, draped in a black cloak, standing strangely still, facing a weathered boulder. The contrast between the figure and the surrounding desolation. My initial thought was that someone had left behind a prop or some kind of creepy prank, but as I looked, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I called out, my voice echoing in the vastness of the space, but the figure remained motionless. Anxiety gnawed at me as I realized how isolated I was with no one around for miles. I quickly texted my family, detailing my location and the strange sight I was about to investigate. Despite my growing unease, I knew I had to find out if this was a person in distress or just a creepy setup. I carefully made my way down the steep, rocky slope, each step feeling like a step into the unknown. The silence of the quarry was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of rocks under my boots. As I approached the figure, my heart pounded with I was close enough to confirm whether it was a person or an inanimate prop when the figure suddenly spun around at an alarming speed. His eyes met mine, burning with anger. "You ruined my shot," he barked, his voice sharp and disorienting. I was stunned, unable to fully comprehend what he was saying. He gestured vaguely toward the ridge where he claimed a camera was. I scanned the area but saw no sign of it. When I asked him how he got there, he answered flatly, "I walked." The casualness in his voice was unsettling. I assured him he was well hydrated and in no immediate danger. He dismissed my concerns with a brief wave and turned back to face the rock, his posture stiff, as if our conversation had never happened. Climbing back up the mountainside, I watched from a distance. For 15 minutes, I saw no movement. The figure remained still, staring at the rock, as if trapped in some strange ritual. The oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on me, and in the end, I had no choice but to leave him there, a dark shadow in the dark quarry, forever etched in my memory. Story 2. The Ghost Train. About a decade ago, I found myself camping in the peaceful wilderness of Ontario's Algonquin Park. It wasn't a remote trip, just a simple car camping trip with my girlfriend. The night was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the gentle lapping of waves on the shore of a small lake. We had settled in for the evening, enjoying a bottle of wine under a canopy of stars. The peace was almost hypnotic, but that peace was suddenly shattered by a distant, disquieting mechanical noise. It started as a faint hum, but it grew louder, a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard in the wild. I glanced at my girlfriend, and though she didn't say anything, her eyes mirrored my own concern. Together, we turned our attention to the source of the noise. Through the trees, we could see a powerful, almost blinding white light cutting through the dark. It was moving quickly, heading in our general direction but slightly off course, as if following an invisible path. As the light drew closer, the noise reached an almost deafening crescendo. It was now clear that the source was not some strange, distant phenomenon, but a powerful, relentless presence. I could make out the unmistakable shape of what appeared to be a train, but it was unlike any train I had ever seen. The light was unusually bright, cutting through the forest like a spotlight. Despite my growing awareness, the scene was confusing. Trains often ran along the tracks, and as far as I knew, there were no tracks near this part of the park. The bright lights and roaring noise seemed out of place in the natural, pristine landscape. The train roared by, its bright lights casting long, distorted shadows across the trees. It was disorienting, like watching an otherworldly scene. The event only lasted a few minutes, but it left an indelible mark on my memory. As soon as the noise died down and the lights faded into the distance, an oppressive silence returned. My girlfriend and I glanced at each other, both struggling with the same unspoken question: what had we just witnessed? The next day, the strange encounter was still fresh in our minds. As we packed up to leave, I tried to make sense of what we had seen. But the more I thought about it, the more absurd it seemed. There were no tracks, no reason for a train to pass through Provincial Park, and no logical explanation for the blinding light and deafening noise. Story 3. A Wild Night by the Lake. During my first summer in British Columbia in 2019, I spent 3 months traveling around with Dora, my converted Ford Explorer. By the end of September, things had become much quieter, with both tourism and visitors sparse. I often found myself the only person on trails, in remote areas, and in campgrounds. One evening, after a few days of camping in a remote corner of Wells Grey Provincial Park, I decided to drive toward 100 Mile House and slowly make my way south toward Vancouver Island. As the sun began to set and the light faded, I was so tired that I decided to turn onto a dirt road, drive another 30 minutes, and park by one of the small lakes I'd seen on the map. The sunset was a brilliant light. The howling of wolves echoed in the distance, and I lit a fire to keep warm. I felt a deep happiness, as I had felt many times that summer alone in nature. As I was enjoying a glass of wine by the fire in the darkness around me, I suddenly heard the distant sound of an engine. A sudden sense of anxiety flooded me. The first in 3 months, I had driven about 4,500 km with Dora through treacherous mountain roads, met many people, and encountered wild animals. But I had never felt so afraid as I did now. My heart was pounding, and my mind was spinning. This was a dead end, so the possibility of this car stopping here was very high. For a strange moment, my mind pictured a terrifying stranger driving a dilapidated old truck, just waiting for the opportunity to do harm. I was a lone woman in my 30s, out in the middle of nowhere, parked next to an unnamed lake. While I usually left plans for remote hiking and camping trips, I had been a little negligent in notifying others where I would be spending the night with Dora, so no one knew where I was. The sound of the engine was getting closer, and the car's headlights were shining through the trees. I ran to the back of the car, grabbed the axe, closed all the doors, and hid behind the dark side of Dora, away from the light of the fire. I hoped the driver wouldn't notice me. The car stopped right next to Dora on the other side of the fire. For a moment, I thought about just going out like normal and saying hello to the other campers. Maybe people would think an evening by the campfire was a great thing. But I couldn't move, thinking only one. Thinking, Don't let yourself be seen. For a few seconds, I wondered which direction I would run if I had to. It's so dark. I don't think I could make it through the trees without breaking my ankle or hitting something. I heard the car door open and someone got out. I decided to open the driver's door and slam it hard, hoping that the sound would echo loudly and menacingly. Immediately, I heard the car door closed, the engine started, and the car drove off toward the farthest part of the lake. I quickly put out the fire and jumped into the back of the car. I have never been more glad to have a camper to cover me than I was that night, because I couldn't sleep in my tent. I slept very poorly that night. I woke up frequently to noises and checked to see if I had locked the door. At one point, I remember hearing the door open and panic rising in my body. I had a dream that two dirty hands were holding a pillow and pressing it against my face. I woke up drenched in sweat and gasping for air. It was still one of the most realistic and terrifying nightmares I have ever had. The next morning, I rushed out of the area just as the sun was rising. To this day, I still have no idea who pulled up next to me that night and wonder if I scared them as much as they did me, as they quickly drove to the other side of the lake. I know that the mind can play tricks on us, especially when we are alone in the wilderness. But at the same time, I feel like our intuition is warning us for some reason. It was a funny story anyway, and now I always let people know where I plan to spend the night if I ever go camping alone again. If you enjoyed this creepy story, be sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Your support allows us to continue bringing you the best in horror entertainment. Support our community of thrill seekers by subscribing and hitting the notification bell so you're always the first to experience our latest and scariest stories. Stay tuned and stay scared.